Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't come out here to disappear. I came out here because the contract was steady, the work made sense, and the desert was the only place left where my head could get quiet. The station wasn't on Google Maps. Not the way people mean it. If you knew where to look, you could find a faint service track on old satellite photos. A pale line that wandered off Bureau of Land Management land and vanished into the color of dust. The actual site was a fenced square of gravel and steel perched on a basalt bench above a dry wash. 3 hours from the nearest town that could be called a town without somebody laughing at you. Officially, it was NV-17 Remote Environmental Monitoring Site, a joint setup used by a state university, a federal program that didn't advertise itself, and a private company that paid people like me to keep it alive. Unofficially, it was a metal box in the middle of nowhere that listened to the earth, sniffed the air, watched the sky, and sent numbers into the world like prayers. I was the person who made sure those numbers kept flowing. I'm not a scientist. I'm a field technician with an electrical background and a long history of being the guy who shows up when something stops working. I can read a wiring diagram. I can splice a cable in a windstorm. I can rebuild a small diesel generator with a flashlight between my teeth. I can make do. That skill set feels very different when the world starts breaking in ways that aren't limited to fuses and bearings. My name is Mason Rourke. I'm 36. Before this contract, I worked on water treatment instrumentation outside Phoenix. Flow meters, chemical dosing pumps, control panels. The job before that was telecom tower maintenance, climbing, rigging, antennas. I learned to respect heights, lightning, and the truth that everything fails eventually. Out here, everything fails faster because the wind wants it to, the heat wants it to, and the dust never sleeps. The rotation was supposed to be simple. 2 weeks on site, 2 weeks off. I'd drive out with a service truck loaded with diesel, spare sensors, sealed boxes of connectors and heat shrink, and food that didn't mind sitting in a metal cabinet. I'd do inspections, clean solar panels, check the battery bank, download local backups, test the satellite link, calibrate the weather instruments, and log everything so the people in offices could keep pretending the desert was a neat set of graphs. Then I'd drive back into cell coverage, shower off the grit, and become a normal person again for a while. This time, I drove out on a Monday and the world ended on a Wednesday. I didn't see it happen. Nobody really did, not at first. I saw the edges of it, like a storm you can smell before you see the clouds. On the drive in, I stopped at a gas station in Hawthorne for coffee and ice. The clerk was watching the news on a little screen above the register. The volume was low, but I caught words like unrest, hospital, unknown, and quarantine. The clerk looked tired in a way that wasn't normal tired, the kind of tired that comes from reading too much and sleeping too little. "Everything all right?" I asked, mostly because it felt wrong to ignore it. He shrugged without looking away from the screen. "Vegas is having some kind of problem. Reno, too. They're saying it's like people are attacking people, like that bath salts thing back in the day." "Riots?" I asked. "Not like that," he said. He finally looked at me, and his eyes had that glassy shine of someone trying not to panic. "My sister works at the hospital. She said they're locking doors." I didn't have an opinion. I wasn't in town enough to have opinions. I paid, filled my thermos, and left. On the edge of Hawthorne, my phone got a couple of bars and then lost them again as I headed south and east, into the spaces between. The station's access road was a long, rough track across a flat that looked like the surface of a dried lake. There were old tire ruts, faded and braided, and the occasional chunk of basalt that would take out your sidewall if you got careless. The last 10 miles climbed into low hills where the wind carved the dust into little hard ripples like frozen waves. When I crested the final rise, the sight came into view. A chain-link fence topped with twisted wire, a small prefab building on piers, a solar array angled toward the sky, a steel mast with antennas, and a scattering of instrument stands, anemometer, temperature and humidity shield, rain gauge, a white boxy enclosure for air particulates, and the squat vault where the seismometer sat buried in insulated calm. It was lonely, but it was clean. That first night I did the same thing I always did. I logged my arrival, checked fuel, checked the generator, checked the batteries. I walked the perimeter with a headlamp and listened to the way silence sounded when it wasn't interrupted by city noise. I cooked rice and canned chicken on a propane stove. I wrote a note on the whiteboard inside. Rotation start Monday, Mason on site. The building had 2 rooms, an equipment room with racks of gear, a workbench, and the battery bank behind a vented barrier, and a living room that was basically a camper interior. Bunk, small table, a cabinet of supplies, a sink with a hand pump connected to a water tank, and a chemical toilet in a closet that never stopped smelling faintly like disinfectant. The station wasn't meant for comfort. It was meant for function. The next morning, Tuesday, the satellite internet link was spotty. That happened sometimes. The dish would drift slightly in wind, or the modem would hang, or the power supply would get finicky. I rebooted it, watched the status lights, got it stable, and sent my routine report. On Wednesday morning, I woke up to the sound of my VHF radio crackling. I kept a handheld VHF radio on the shelf above my bunk. The station also had a more powerful fixed radio tied into the mast antenna, mostly for local coordination with aircraft and the occasional passing state ranger. We weren't a dispatch center, we were a listening post. But radios don't care what you are. They carry whatever people throw into them. The handheld was set to scan, moving through a list of channels. It stopped on one, with a voice so strained it sounded like it was being dragged through gravel. Repeat, any unit in the area of Mina. We have multiple calls, violent individuals, unresponsive to commands, officers down, request immediate. A burst of static cut it off. The scan resumed, caught half a sentence on another channel. Locking the doors, we can't. Static again. I sat up fast enough to bang my knee on the edge of the bunk. My heart was already racing before I understood why. The desert around me was the same. The walls of the station were the same. But the tone of those voices was not the same as anything I'd heard outside a movie. I grabbed the handheld and switched it to the frequency I knew would carry farther, the fixed radio's monitored channel. I flipped on the fixed unit and listened. For a long minute, nothing but the hiss of open air. Then a man's voice came through, calm in that forced way that people use when they're trying to keep calm for someone else. This is Nye County. Any remote sites or contractors monitoring, advise status. We are receiving reports of coordinated attacks, unclear cause. If you are in a hardened location, remain there. If you are mobile, do not travel unless absolutely necessary. Repeat, do not. His voice broke into static and vanished. I stared at the radio like it had betrayed me. My brain tried to fit what I heard into my world. Coordinated attacks, unclear cause, remain in a hardened location. The station was fenced, it had supplies, it had power and water and a satellite link. It was as hardened as anything I had. I walked into the equipment room and brought the satellite system back up on my laptop. The link was slow, like pushing water through a straw, but it worked. I opened the news sites first, then the government sites, then the emergency alert pages. What I saw didn't make sense. And that's the worst part, because it wasn't a single scary headline. It was a pattern. Hospitals overwhelmed, emergency rooms closing, police asking the public not to come to stations, videos of people moving wrong, too fast, too stiff, too aggressive, people who should have been down getting back up, people biting, people tearing, people acting like there was nothing inside them but hunger and noise. The word zombie was there, of course. People can't help themselves. They cling to familiar stories because reality feels too big otherwise. The official language didn't use that word. It used phrases like highly aggressive infected individuals, unknown pathogen, loss of normal pain response, and rapid behavioral deterioration. But the videos looked like every cheap apocalypse clip I'd ever laughed at. Except the cameras were shaking too hard and the screams were too real. I tried calling my sister in Arizona, no signal. I tried texting, nothing. I tried the contractor office in Reno. The call wouldn't complete. The only reliable connection I had was the satellite link, and even that was slowing down as more people tried to use whatever they could to reach someone. By noon, the link to one of the emergency management pages loaded a simple message in black text on a white background. Shelter in place. Do not travel. I read it 3 times. Shelter in place. Do not travel. I was already sheltered. I was already in place. I looked out the small window of the living room. The desert was bright and empty. The wind was brushing dust off the flats in thin sheets. The sky was hard blue. If the world was collapsing, it was collapsing somewhere else. That was the first time the thought came to me, plain and cold. If I stay here, no one will come. That thought should have been comforting. It wasn't. It felt like the moment you realize you're not lost because you took a wrong turn. You're lost because the map stopped existing. The station had a limited amount of everything. It wasn't a bunker, it was a work site. It expected a resupply truck every 2 weeks and a fresh human every 2 weeks. Without that, it could limp along, but not forever. I pulled out the supply inventory binder. I added up the numbers like I was doing a job estimate. Water. The main tank held 150 gallons. There were another 40 gallons in sealed jugs. If I rationed to 1 gallon a day, drinking, minimal washing, cooking, I had roughly 6 months. That was if nothing leaked and if the tank stayed clean. Food. A couple cases of freeze-dried meals, rice, beans, canned chicken, canned vegetables, peanut butter, oats. Enough for a month at normal intake, 2 months if careful. More if I got creative, but calories are calories. Fuel. 200 gallons of diesel in a locked drum cage. The generator was a small unit, a dependable workhorse that could run the station if solar failed. But diesel doesn't last forever, and generator use would burn through it fast. The station's primary power was solar and battery. The generator was a backup. Batteries. A bank of deep cycle units in a ventilated cabinet. They were in good shape now. Heat and time would change that. Medical. A first aid kit, bandages, antiseptic. A few antibiotics left over from the site's last medical restock. Pain relievers, electrolyte packets. Basic. Tools. Enough to keep the station running. Enough to keep me alive if I used them right. Weapons. The station didn't officially keep weapons. My contractors did. In the locked drawer under my bunk, I had a compact rifle in a hard case, plus a sidearm and a few boxes of ammunition. I'd carried them on remote jobs for years for one reason. Wild animals and desperate people sometimes show up where they shouldn't. I never thought I'd be counting those rounds for anything more than a worst-case story. I didn't touch them yet. I didn't want to make it real by laying them out on the table like I was preparing for war. I wasn't at war. I was at a survey station in Nevada. watching the news like everyone else. Then the radio crackled again. "This is a state emergency. If you are receiving this, be advised. Major highways are closed in multiple regions. Do not attempt to drive into population centers. Resources are limited. Repeat, do not attempt." Static, then a different voice, higher, more frantic. "Anyone out there, this is Dr. Lena Park. I'm at the Tonopah substation. If anyone can hear me." I froze. Tonopah was still far, over 100 miles, but it was the closest name I'd heard that wasn't just Reno or Vegas. The voice came again, clearer. "This is Dr. Lena Park. I'm with the State Environmental Lab. We're trapped at the substation building near Tonopah, 2 of us. We have 1 vehicle, but the roads are not safe. If anyone is in a remote site, please respond. We need to know there are places still functioning. Please, any response." I reached for the fixed radio mic before I could talk myself out of it. My hands were sweating. "This is NV-17 site," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, like I was hearing someone else speak. "Remote monitoring station east of Hawthorne. I'm on site alone. I have power and supplies. I copy your message." There was a pause. I thought maybe she didn't hear me. Then her voice came through, and the relief in it was so sharp it made my throat tighten. "NV-17, thank you, thank you. Are you secure? Do you have any injuries?" "Negative injuries," I said. "Site is fenced. No contact with infected." She hesitated on the word like she didn't want to give it power. "We're seeing them here. They came out of town on foot and in vehicles until the vehicles stopped. We're locked inside. We have limited water. Can you advise?" A burst of noise slammed through the radio. Another voice cut in, angry and rough. "Do not give out your location," the voice said. "You hear me? Don't tell anyone where you are." I stiffened. "Who is this?" "Doesn't matter," the rough voice said. "You want to live, you keep your mouth shut. People will come for what you got. Those things, they follow noise and lights. You keep quiet, you stay dark." Dr. Park came back, her voice tight. "Who was that? NV-17, do you know?" "I don't know," I said. "I'm not giving coordinates. I'm not broadcasting anything. But you said you're at the Tonopah substation building. That's already—" "I know," she snapped, then softened. "I know. We were trying to reach anyone. We just need information. Do you have satellite internet? Any official updates?" I looked at the laptop screen where pages loaded slowly, then failed, then loaded again. "Limited. Shelter-in-place advisory. Major highways closed in multiple regions. That's all I've got. If you can stay locked down, stay locked down." Another pause. I could hear breathing. Maybe her hand was over the mic. Maybe she was crying quietly. Then she said, "We're not going to make it here if nobody comes. But if we drive, we might die on the road. What would you do?" That was the moment the story stopped being news and became a decision. If I told her to come, I'd be inviting someone to my off-map place. I'd be breaking the one advantage I had, invisibility. If I told her to stay, I'd be condemning her to whatever came to that building. I thought about her voice. I thought about the rough voice cutting in like a knife. I thought about the word forgotten. "I can't tell you what to do," I said, and I hated myself for it. "But if you move smart, quiet, no lights at night, avoid towns, avoid people, and if you do get out this way, don't talk about it on open radio." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay, thank you. NV-17, if you can. Stay on this frequency at the top of the hour, even if you just listen. It helps to know someone is out there." "I'll monitor," I said. When the channel went quiet again, the station felt smaller. The walls pressed in. The desert outside didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like ocean. I spent the rest of that day reinforcing things I'd never bothered reinforcing before. First, I walked the fence line and checked every tie wire, every post, every tension bar. The fence was meant to keep out wandering cattle and curious hikers. It wasn't meant to stop people who didn't feel pain and didn't get tired, but it was a barrier. Barriers buy time. I pulled the service truck inside the fence and parked it close to the building, nose toward the gate. The truck was my lifeline and my escape at the same time. I didn't want it outside where someone could siphon it or where something could crawl into the undercarriage. Then I turned my attention to the gate. The gate was a double-swing chain-link piece with a padlock and a chain. Good enough for normal. Not good enough now. I pulled steel T-posts from the supply rack, left over from instrument stands, and drove them into the ground behind the gate line. I ran a heavy chain through the mesh and around the posts and tightened it until the gate barely flexed. If something hit it, the force would transfer into the posts, not just the latch. I added noise control next. The station had 2 exterior lights, motion-activated, bright, meant to let a tech walk around at night. Those lights might as well be flares in a dead world. I disabled the motion sensors and replaced them with manual switches inside. If I needed light, I'd choose when. Inside, I covered the windows with reflective insulation panels. The building wasn't a house. It didn't have curtains. It had glass meant for daylight and sanity. I traded both for invisibility. I checked the solar array and the wiring conduit. I tightened the mounts. I cleaned the panels. I checked the charge controller settings and logged the battery voltage. I treated it like a patient in intensive care, because that's what it was. The station's heart was a series of systems that all depended on each other. Solar panels produced power when the sun was up. A charge controller regulated that power and fed it into the battery bank. The batteries stored energy and ran the equipment day and night. An inverter converted battery power into the kind of power the station devices needed. The data logger, basically a rugged computer designed to live in harsh environments, collected readings from the sensors and managed when to transmit. The satellite modem and dish sent that data out. If any one piece failed, the station would degrade. It wouldn't die instantly, but it would slip. And if it slipped far enough, the batteries could over-discharge, the electronics could corrupt, and then even if I fixed the broken part, the whole system might not come back. I used to think of it as a job. That night, I thought of it as a life support machine. At sunset, I ate a measured amount of food, oats, peanut butter, a handful of dried fruit, and I wrote a new note on the whiteboard. Day 3. Outbreak confirmed via radio. Monitoring hourly, reinforcing sight, stay invisible. It felt ridiculous to write it, like I was pretending my little notes mattered, but the act of writing anchored me. If nobody else ever read it, at least I would. And if I didn't survive, maybe someone would find the building someday and understand that someone had been here, thinking, trying. At 7 p.m., I turned on the fixed radio and waited. "This is Dr. Lena Park," the voice came through, weaker. "Tonopah substation. Still here, still locked. We have one injury, not bitten, laceration. We have no antibiotics if anyone can advise." The rough voice cut in again. "Shut up, lady," it snapped. "You're painting a target on yourself." Dr. Park kept going, trembling but stubborn. "If you're hearing this, we are trying to decide whether to move at first light. If you have information about safe routes..." I leaned forward to the mic. "Tonopah, Nevada, 17. I copy. I can't confirm any route is safe. Avoid US 95 if you can. It will be a funnel. Use back roads. Keep your fuel topped. Don't stop for strangers." The rough voice came back. "And don't lead them to you, Nevada, 17. You hear me?" I stared at the radio. "Identify yourself," I said. A laugh, dry as sand. "Name's Cal. That's all you get." "Cal, you monitoring from where?" I asked. "Not saying," he said. "Then stop telling people what to do like you're in charge," I said. And my own tone surprised me. It was sharp. It had anger in it. Anger was easier than fear. Cal's voice went quiet for a moment. Then he said almost calmly, "Fine. You want to be noble? Be noble. Just remember, radios work both ways." The channel hissed. Dr. Park spoke again, softer, like she didn't want to provoke him. "NV-17, thank you. If we move, we'll try to keep it quiet. We'll check in if we can." "Copy," I said. When the hour passed and the radio quieted, I shut it off and sat in the dim light of a headlamp with the lens covered in red tape to keep it from spilling. Outside, something yipped in the distance. A coyote. Normal. But my mind kept replaying Cal's words. Radios work both ways. The next morning, I woke before dawn and listened. The station's instruments didn't care about the apocalypse. The anemometer spun. The temperature sensor logged a cold night. The seismometer, buried in its insulated vault, continued to measure tiny vibrations. Wind, distant traffic, maybe a small rockfall in the hills. I pulled up the seismometer's live feed and stared at the lines. It was a habit, a little morning ritual. Normally, I'd look for anomalies, spikes that suggested a calibration issue or a pattern that meant a truck drove too close, or a line that looked too noisy and needed troubleshooting. This morning, I saw a different kind of pattern. Around midnight, the background noise changed, not dramatically, but enough that I could see it when I zoomed out. It looked like a distant rumble that rose and fell in waves. I knew what that could be because I'd seen it in records during wildfire season and during big storms and during heavy traffic events. Mass movement, lots of vehicles, heavy, sustained. Somewhere far away, people were moving. Or something was moving. I minimized the graph and opened the satellite map data we used internally. Public maps, our own layers with site locations and access routes. My cursor hovered over my station icon like it was a target. If Cal was right, if people were listening and logging, then my station name could be enough for someone with access to those layers to triangulate. But who would have access? Not many. The university, the contractor, a couple agencies. Unless the wrong people got the right laptop. Unless offices were abandoned. Unless someone decided remote sites were supply caches. I swallowed. I didn't like the way my brain was turning everything into threat. I stepped outside at sunrise to do a perimeter check and something caught my eye immediately. A glint on the far ridge, maybe a mile out. I raised binoculars. The ridge was a line of broken black rock. Wind moved sparse sage. In the middle of it, a tiny flash happened again, a sun on glass or metal. I held my breath and watched. A figure moved, too far to see details, but it was a person. A person on that ridge meant someone had walked a long way to get there, or driven and then hiked. Either way, they were near. They stood still for a long time, like they were looking at the station. Then they crouched, disappeared behind a rock, and the glint stopped. My stomach dropped. I backed toward the building without turning my back on the ridge. My boots sounded too loud on the gravel. The wind seemed to fade. Even the station's little noises, the faint hum of the inverter fan, felt like they were broadcasting my presence. Inside, I locked the door and moved to the equipment room where the radio rack was. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't want any transmission. I just listened, ears straining for something that wasn't there. For the next hour, nothing happened. No footsteps, no rattling fence, no voices. but I couldn't shake the certainty that I'd been observed. I forced myself to think like a tech, not like a frightened animal. If someone was out there, what would they do? They could approach and try the gate. They could watch and wait for me to leave. They could try to cut the fence. They could take potshots at the solar panels for fun or to force me out. They could also be sick or injured or desperate, and they might not know what the station was. They might just see a building and hope it had water. I couldn't control what they wanted. I could only control what I showed them. So, I made the station look dead. I shut down anything that made noise. I switched the inverter to a lower fan mode. I powered off the satellite modem. I disabled the internal overhead light and used my headlamp only when necessary. Then I waited. Around noon, I heard the first sound, a faint metallic tick. It was the kind of sound that could be anything. Wind moving a loose chain, a rock shifting, a bird pecking. Then it came again. Closer. I eased to the window slit between the insulation panels and the frame and looked through. A man was at the fence. He was thin, wearing a dirty tan jacket and jeans. He had a backpack. His hair was dark and matted with sweat. He looked like someone who'd walked for days. He moved cautiously, glancing around like he expected something to jump out at him. He didn't move like the infected people in the videos. He moved like a normal human. He reached for the gate chain, tested it, and frowned when it didn't give. He took a step back and looked at the fence line, scanning for weak points. His eyes flicked toward the building. I stayed still, barely breathing. I didn't want him to see movement. If he thought the place was abandoned, he might leave. He didn't leave. He crouched and dug in his backpack. He pulled out bolt cutters. My throat went tight. Bolt cutters meant he'd planned to get into locked places. Bolt cutters meant he'd been doing this. He took the cutters to the chain links near the gate hinge and squeezed. The cutters bit. The link snapped with a sharp, clean sound. He cut another, and another. The fence wasn't thick enough to resist real tools. It was meant as a warning, not a fortress. My mind raced through options. If he got in, I could confront him. I could threaten. I could scare him off. But any confrontation risked noise, injury, escalation. And even if he left, he now knew the station existed. I made a decision that felt terrible because it made me feel like Cal. I grabbed the fixed radio microphone and switched the unit on. Not to transmit, but to power a little trick we used for testing the speaker. A tone generator built into the system for calibrating audio levels. It could produce a loud squeal if you set it wrong. I set it wrong on purpose. A high, piercing squeal blasted from the external speaker mounted under the eave. An alarm I'd forgotten the station even had, designed to deter vandalism and wildlife when triggered by certain sensor conditions. The sound ripped across the desert like a siren. The man at the fence jumped back hard, hands flying to his ears. He stumbled, looked around in panic, and then ran along the fence line, trying to find where it was coming from. He stopped cutting. He moved fast. If he was infected, the sound might have pulled him toward it. If he was human, it was warning. The station was not dead. The station could scream. He sprinted away from the gate, scanning the hills as if expecting someone to step out with a rifle. I shut the alarm off after 10 seconds. The sudden silence was almost worse. The man stood 50 yards out, breathing hard, staring at the building. He raised his hands, palms out, like he was trying to show he wasn't a threat. Then he yelled, "Hey!" His voice carried thin in the dry air. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just need water, please." I didn't respond. He tried again. "I saw the fence and thought nobody was here. I didn't know. I'm sorry." He took a step closer. My hands were shaking. I hated how fast this had become a standoff. I hated that I felt like the kind of person who locks the door and pretends not to hear a man begging. But my mind kept showing me the videos, the news, the rough voice on the radio, the truth that a single mistake could end everything. I couldn't let him in. Not yet, maybe not ever. He dropped his hands and looked down, shoulders sagging. He looked like he might cry. Then he turned and walked away along the fence line, not running now, just moving like his legs were heavy. He disappeared behind a rise. I waited until the sun shifted and shadows changed. I waited until I was sure he wasn't circling back. Then I did something that surprised me. I filled 2 one-gallon jugs with water. I added a packet of electrolyte powder to one, shook it until it dissolved. I grabbed a couple sealed protein bars and a small roll of gauze from the first aid kit. I put it all in a bag. I didn't open the gate. I didn't go outside the fence. I didn't approach the hills. I took the bag to the edge of the fence near the wash, where the ground dipped so a person outside could reach without climbing. I slipped the bag through a gap I cut in the bottom corner of the mesh with pliers, just big enough to pass supplies, but not big enough for someone to crawl through easily. Then I backed away, went inside, and watched through the slit. An hour later, he came back. He approached carefully, scanning. He saw the bag and froze. He looked up at the building. Then he moved to the bag, grabbed it, and backed away like it might explode. He opened it and stared at the water jugs like they were gold. He lifted his face toward the station and shouted, voice cracking, "Thank you. I swear I won't come back. Thank you." Then he walked away, and this time he didn't look back. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and let my breath shake out of me. My chest hurt like I'd been running. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel safe. I felt like I'd just bought myself a different kind of danger. Because now I'd made a mark. I'd shown that the station wasn't abandoned. I'd shown that someone inside had water. I'd also shown that I was capable of mercy. Mercy is a beacon. That evening, at the top of the hour, I turned on the radio. "This is Dr. Lena Park," came the familiar voice. "Tonopah substation. We moved. We're on a county road, stopped with engine off. We saw them, on the highway, a lot. We turned off. We're trying to follow a dirt route south and then east. If anyone can advise..." Cal cut in immediately. "You're going to get yourself killed talking like that." "Doctor." Park's voice rose, angry now. "And if we don't talk, we die anyway. At least this way someone..." I keyed the mic. "Tonopah, Nevada, 17. Dr. Park, if you're moving east, be advised my area has at least one unknown person on foot near my site. Human, not infected, cutters." I deterred him. He left, but you should assume remote sites might be watched. Her breathing came through the radio, sharp. "Copy, thank you. We won't head toward any sites directly. We'll keep moving." Cal's voice came again, quieter. "See, that's what I'm saying. People are out there hunting." I couldn't tell if he meant infected people or normal people. I said, "Cal, you're on this channel every hour. You care enough to warn people. Why not help with information?" A pause. Then, "Information gets you killed," he said. "I've lived through other bad things, Mason. You don't survive by being a lighthouse." He knew my name. The cold that went through me wasn't fear, it was recognition. Radios work both ways. After that, I stopped using my station name on air. I became remote site, nothing more. Days passed in a rhythm that wasn't normal but became normal because I needed it to. Morning. Check battery voltage, charge controller logs, and solar output. Clean panels if dust built up. Inspect the mast visually with binoculars. Check the fence line. Check the generator's oil level and coolant. Inventory food and water. Record everything in the logbook. Midday. Scan radio frequencies. Try satellite link for updates. Download cached news summaries before the internet choked. Recharge handheld devices. Plan. Evening. Cook. Ration. Listen at the top of the hour. Sleep with one ear open. The desert didn't change much. Some days wind screamed hard enough to rattle the building. Some nights were so still I could hear my own heartbeat. The stars looked indifferent. The world beyond my horizon changed in ways I could only imagine. The satellite updates became fewer and less official. The websites stopped posting. The emergency banners froze in place. Radio traffic shifted from organized dispatch to scattered voices, then to long stretches of silence broken by sudden panic. I heard a call from a highway patrol unit that ended in screaming and nothing else. I heard a man reciting coordinates like a prayer, begging someone to come. I heard Dr. Park twice more. The second time she sounded exhausted but alive. She said they'd found an abandoned maintenance yard and were hiding inside. She didn't give details. She just said, "We're still here." Then the channel went quiet. I didn't hear her again after that. Cal was still there most nights, like a shadow you couldn't chase away. One night, he spoke directly to me. "You got company again?" he asked. My skin prickled. "What makes you say that?" "Because you're breathing loud," he said. "You only breathe like that when you're watching something." I tightened my grip on the mic. "I'm fine." "Sure," he said. "Listen, I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to keep people from doing dumb things that get them killed." "Like asking for help?" I said. "Like telling the world where they're hiding," he replied. "You still got satellite?" "Intermittent," I said carefully. "You see the updated advisories?" he asked. "No," I said, because the truth was I hadn't seen anything new in days. Cal exhaled. "Then here's your advisory. Nobody is coming. There's no cavalry. There's no rescue. You're on your own." I stared at the radio. "You don't know that." "I do," he said. And his voice had something in it that made my stomach sink. Not cruelty, certainty. Because I was on the rescue side when it started. We tried. It fell apart. Now it's just pockets. You're in a pocket. Keep it that way. "Who are you?" I asked again. A pause. "I used to be a deputy," he said. "Nye County. Before that, Army. Doesn't matter. Now I'm just a guy with a radio in a place I don't want found." "Then why talk at all?" I asked. "Because silence makes you do stupid things," he said. "Talking reminds you you're human." It hit harder than I expected. After that, I listened more than I spoke. On day 12, the first real equipment failure happened. It started as a warning light on the charge controller, a fault indicating inconsistent voltage from the solar array. I checked the array output with a meter and saw fluctuations that didn't match clouds or shadow. Solar panels are simple devices, light in, power out, but the wiring between them can be complicated. Series strings, parallel junctions, combiner boxes with fuses, connectors that can corrode. I opened the combiner box at the base of the array and found the problem immediately. A connector had loosened and arced. Tiny electrical sparks that slowly charred the plastic and created carbon buildup. Carbon conducts electricity in unpredictable ways. It can create a path that heats up, damages insulation, and eventually becomes a fire risk. Out here, you don't get to call a fire department for a smoking junction box. I shut down the array, isolated it from the controller, and worked in the heat with sweat dripping into my eyes. I cut out the damaged section, cleaned the terminals, crimped new connectors, and sealed everything with adhesive-lined heat shrink meant for harsh environments. I tightened every connection in the box and tested each string. It took 4 hours. When I brought the array back online, the controller stabilized, the battery bank began charging cleanly, and the station's heartbeat steady again. I leaned against the array frame and laughed, but it came out like a cough. This was the kind of failure I used to fix without thinking. Now, it felt like I'd just performed surgery on myself. That night, I added a new rule to my survival plan. Assume one major system will fail every 2 weeks. Be ready. The next failure came sooner. On day 16, the wind picked up hard. Gusts strong enough to bend the sparse shrubs flat. Dust turned the air a dull beige. The sky looked like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. I heard a metallic clank outside and my stomach jumped. I grabbed binoculars and looked at the mast. One of the guy wires. A steel cable that stabilizes the mast was vibrating violently. The turnbuckle, a threaded tension adjuster, was shaking. If it loosened enough, the mast could sway more than designed. If it swayed, it could fatigue. If it fatigued, it could fail. If the mast failed, I'd lose antennas, radio, satellite alignment, possibly the whole roof line if it went down wrong. I didn't have the luxury of waiting for the wind to stop. I put on goggles, a dust mask, gloves, and a climbing harness. I wasn't going up the mast, there was no need, but I was going to the anchor point where the guy wire met the ground. The wind tried to shove me sideways as soon as I stepped outside. Dust bit every inch of exposed skin. My goggles helped, but grit still found its way in. At the anchor, I saw that the lock nut on the turnbuckle had backed off. Vibration, heat cycles, a tiny failure of maintenance. I used 2 wrenches, leaned my weight into them and tightened the nut until my forearms burned. Then I wrapped the threads with safety wire, thin stainless steel wire used to prevent fasteners from loosening in vibration-prone environments, and twisted it tight with pliers. It was old school, it was effective. I tested the wire tension and then ran for the building when the wind kicked even harder, the kind that makes you instinctively lower your head like an animal. Inside, I stripped off gritty gear and checked my face in the small mirror. Dust had carved lines down my cheeks where sweat ran. My eyes were red. I looked like someone who belonged out here now. That night, I slept with the wind pounding the walls like fists. I dreamed of fences failing and woke up with my heart racing. On day 21, I saw smoke on the western horizon. Not a big plume, not a thick column, but a gray smear that grew slowly over hours. Wildfire smoke. It happens every year. Lightning strikes dry brush and a fire creeps. Out here, there's not much to burn, but fires don't need much. They need wind and patience. Smoke meant the air quality sensor would be busy. It also meant visibility would drop and the sky would turn weird colors at sunset. It also meant there might be people moving. Fires push people out of hiding. That afternoon, a vehicle appeared on the access track. I saw it from the window slit. A dusty SUV moving slow, tires kicking up a low trail of pale dust. It stopped far from the fence, maybe 200 yards out, and the engine shut off. 2 people got out. They stood by the SUV and looked at the station like it was a mirage. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. One of them raised binoculars. The other pointed at the solar array. They spoke to each other, but I couldn't hear. Then the one with binoculars lifted a hand and waved. I stayed still. They waited. The wind carried dust in thin sheets. The smoke on the horizon made the sun look duller. They started walking toward the fence. My pulse hammered. I didn't want to do the alarm trick again. It had worked once, but it had also proven the station was occupied. If I screamed at every visitor, eventually someone would decide to scream back. I had to decide hide completely or control the encounter. Control meant risk, but hiding didn't erase risk. Hiding just delayed it. I pulled my sidearm from the locked drawer and secured it in a belt holster. I didn't want it in my hand. I wanted it present, but not threatening. I grabbed the fixed radio mic and turned the unit on low volume. If things went wrong, I wanted Cal to hear. Then I stepped into the equipment room and flipped on the exterior camera feed. The station had a simple security setup. 2 cameras mounted under the eaves, wired to a small recorder. Mostly used to document vandalism attempts and wildlife. The images weren't high definition, but they were enough. The 2 people reached the fence line. They looked normal. Dusty. Tired. One was a woman in her late 40s, maybe, with sunburned cheeks and a baseball cap. The other was a younger man, early 20s, with a backpack and a long object wrapped in cloth strapped to it, maybe a rifle, maybe a tool. The woman called out, careful and controlled. "Hello? Anyone inside? We're not here to cause trouble." Her voice sounded like someone who had practiced being calm. I took a breath, then opened the building door and stepped out onto the small porch area inside the fence. They saw me and froze. I raised my hands slightly, not surrender, just open. "You can't come in," I said, "not through the gate." The woman nodded fast. "We understand. We saw the panels. We thought maybe someone was still working here. We're running out of water." The younger man shifted his weight like he wanted to move closer, then stopped himself. I said, "State your names and where you came from." The woman swallowed. "I'm Maribel Sosa. I used to run maintenance for the county school district in Esmeralda. This is my nephew, Tylen. We left when things started. We've been moving back roads." I watched their eyes. In all the videos, infected people had a look. Focused on one thing, hungry, without normal hesitation. These 2 had fear, shame, calculation, human. "Any bites?" I asked. Maribel shook her head immediately. Tylen did too. "Any contact with infected in the last 24 hours?" I asked. Maribel hesitated. "We saw them on the highway 2 days ago. We didn't stop. We've been avoiding towns." I nodded slowly. "I can give you water, not much, and some food, but you can't stay here." Maribel's shoulders sagged in relief so deep it looked like pain. "Thank you. We're not looking to stay, we just need to keep going." Tylen spoke for the first time, voice rough. "We're safe. Do you know anything? Radios are mostly dead." I glanced at the mast. "I monitor, that's all. I don't have a safe place to direct you." Maribel looked around the fenced site, eyes catching on the building, the array, the locked fuel cage. "You're alone here?" "Yes," I said. That's brave," she said, but her tone wasn't admiration. It was disbelief. "It's not brave," I said, "it's a choice." I went back inside, filled 2 jugs, added electrolyte packets, and packaged food, protein bars, a small bag of rice, a can of beans. I added a roll of tape and a small tube of antiseptic ointment because maintenance people recognize each other's needs. I slid the bag through the fence gap. Maribel picked it up like it was sacred. She looked up at me. "If you ever need anything, we have a place, kind of. An old service depot south of here, not close, but if you listen on the radio, sometimes we'll be on channel." I cut her off gently but firmly. "Don't give locations on open radio." She blinked, then nodded, understanding dawning. "Right, sorry, right." Tylen stared at the station. "How long you think you can stay here?" I didn't answer right away. The honest answer was, "I don't know. Instead, I said, as long as my equipment holds and nobody forces me out. Maribel's eyes softened. Being invisible works until it doesn't, she said. Then they walked back to the SUV, started it, and drove away, slow and quiet. I watched until the dust trail faded into the flats. When they were gone, the station felt quieter than before, like it had been holding its breath and now exhaled. That night, I told Cal about them. Not names, not details, just 2 people came, asked for water. I gave supplies through the fence, sent them away. Cal was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "And now, they know you exist." "Yes," I said. "You just turned your pocket into a rumor," he said. "I couldn't let them die," I replied. "You don't know they would have died," he said. "They would have," I said, and my voice cracked. "Out here, water is time. They were out of time." Cal sighed. "You're going to learn the hard way," he said, "or you're going to die nice." I stared at the radio. "Why are you still talking to me?" "Because you remind me of who I used to be," he said quietly, "and because I'm lonely." Lonely. The word hung in the equipment room like dust in a beam of light. After that, the station became something else, not just a hiding place but a node in a broken network. People started calling more often at the top of the hour, not official voices, just survivors. A man named Russell who said he was trapped in a mine office and had a generator but no fuel. A woman named Keisha who said she was on a ranch and had cattle but no medicine. A kid, just a kid, who kept repeating, "Is anyone out there?" until someone answered. I listened to all of it and spoke as little as possible. I didn't give my location, I didn't give my name, I gave advice when I could. Conserve water, avoid roads, keep noise down. Don't assume a locked door will hold unless you reinforce it. Don't run your generator in the open, and if you have to move, move early morning and late evening when the heat won't kill you. Mostly, I listened. Listening is an action. It doesn't feel like one until the moment you realize you're the only witness to someone else's existence. On day 30, the infected reached my horizon. I didn't see them at first. I smelled them. That sounds ridiculous, but it's true. The wind shifted one afternoon and carried a sour, stale odor that didn't belong to sagebrush and dust. It wasn't like decay from a dead animal. It was more like a locker room left closed for a month, mixed with something chemical. I stepped outside and the smell hit again in a stronger wave. I turned slowly, scanning the flats. At the far edge, where the service track dipped into the wash, I saw movement. 3 figures, maybe 4. They were far enough away that they were just dark smudges against pale ground. They moved in a way that made my skin crawl. Not smooth, not purposeful, but relentless. They didn't pause to look around. They didn't talk. They just moved forward, feet dragging sometimes, then snapping into faster steps, like their bodies couldn't decide on a pace. They were headed toward the fence. I backed inside without slamming the door. I shut off the inverter's audible alarm. I turned the exterior lights to manual. I checked the gate chain again. I moved supplies away from windows. I shut off anything that made extra noise. Then I watched through the slit. They reached the fence about 20 minutes later. Up close, they looked like people who had been through hell and come out without the part that makes you human. Clothes torn. Skin sunburned and cracked. One had a forearm wrapped in dirty cloth that might have once been a shirt. Another had no shoes and feet that looked raw. Their faces were slack until they hit the fence, and then their expressions changed, not to frustration but to a kind of furious focus. They grabbed the chain link and shook it. The fence rattled like a drum. My stomach clenched. Sound. So much sound. I watched, forcing myself not to move. They shook the fence harder. They yanked. They slammed into it. One bit at the metal, teeth scraping, head jerking like an animal in a trap. The noise was constant now. If any living person was within miles, they would hear it. I thought of Cal's warning about noise and lights. I thought of my earlier mercy. Had I brought this? No, that's not how it worked. The infected didn't track kindness. They tracked sound, motion, maybe scent. They wandered. They followed whatever drew them. But still, the timing felt like accusation. The fence held for now, but chain link isn't designed for repeated impact from bodies that don't feel pain. It's designed to flex. Flexing becomes fatigue. Fatigue becomes failure. I needed a new plan immediately. I couldn't shoot through the fence. I could physically, but shooting would be noise, and noise would draw more. It would also turn a contained problem into an announcement. I couldn't open the gate and deal with them up close. That was insanity. I could try to lure them away. That was the option that made sense, and it was also the option that required me to do something risky. Create controlled noise away from the station. I dug through the equipment cabinet until I found what I needed. An old handheld air horn used for wildlife deterrence and emergency signaling. I also found a battery-powered portable speaker, the kind we used for test tones and training videos when multiple techs were on site. It ran on rechargeable batteries. It could get loud. I loaded the speaker with a looping sound file. White noise mixed with intermittent beeps. Something that would carry but wasn't as sharp as the station alarm. I set it to play on repeat. Then I took a deep breath, opened the building door, and stepped outside inside the fence line. The infected hit the fence again, hard, as if sensing motion. Their heads snapped toward me. Their mouths opened. Their noises weren't words. They were raw throat sounds. My hands shook as I clipped the speaker to the top of a metal instrument stand near the far corner of the fenced site, the corner farthest from the building and gate. I hit play. The speaker emitted a loud, repetitive beep pattern, like a broken backup alarm. The infected turned toward it immediately. They moved along the fence line, drawn to the sound. They pressed and shook and clawed at the mesh near the speaker, focusing there. Good. Focus away from the gate. Now, I needed to move them farther. I grabbed the air horn and stepped to the opposite corner, near the wash. I waited until the infected were fully engaged at the speaker corner. Then I blew the horn, one long blast. The sound punched the air like a physical force. Even with my hands over my ears, it hurt. The infected whipped their heads toward me and the horn. Their bodies shifted like a school of fish turning. I blew it again, shorter and then again. And then I ran along the inside of the fence line toward the wash corner where the ground dipped. I wasn't trying to be fast for athletic reasons. I was trying to be fast because panic makes you stupid, and I needed to stay ahead of that stupidity. At the wash corner, I had prepared something earlier without knowing exactly why. A section of the lower fence where I could cut a wider gap if needed, reinforced with extra wire so it could be closed again. Now, I cut it. I snipped and bent the mesh and created an opening just big enough to toss something through, not big enough for a person to slide easily unless they forced it. I took the speaker off the stand, kept it playing, and tossed it through the gap into the wash outside the fence. The beeping continued, now outside. The infected slammed toward the sound, pressing the fence. One found the gap and shoved at it, hands grabbing wire, pulling. But the gap was low and awkward, and their movements weren't coordinated. They weren't thinking. They were reacting. They tore at the opening. The wire held for a moment, then gave. One of them tumbled through. Then another. They fell into the wash, scrabbling, and then staggered toward the speaker as it continued to beep and squeal. They moved away from the fence line entirely, down the wash, following the sound like dogs chasing a whistle. I backed away inside the fence, breathing hard. I watched as the last infected shuffled through the broken gap and disappeared down the wash, the sound fading as they moved farther. When the beeping was finally swallowed by distance, the desert felt quiet again. But it wasn't the good kind of quiet. It was the quiet after you've seen the thing that's been chasing you in your nightmares. The fence was compromised now. I'd traded one threat for another. The gate was still chained, but the lower section was damaged. If infected came again and found that weakness, they wouldn't need bolt cutters. They'd just push. I spent the rest of the day repairing the fence in brutal heat, hands raw from wire, sweat turning dust into mud on my skin. I reinforced the bottom with additional wire mesh and ran a strand of barbed wire along the base inside, angled outward like a crude skirt. Not pretty, but it would make it harder to pull apart quickly. It wasn't a permanent fix. It was a patch. Everything was a patch now. That night, when the top of the hour came, I keyed the mic and said one thing to no one in particular. "They're out here now." Cal answered immediately. "How many?" "4, I said. "Maybe more nearby. They hit the fence. I lured them away." Cal was silent for a beat. Then he said, "Now you understand why noise is death." "Yes," I said. "I understand." "You staying?" he asked. I looked around the station. My walls, my systems, my notes on the whiteboard, my supply stacks, my little pieces of order. "I'm staying," I said. "Then you reinforce like your life depends on it," Cal replied. "Because it does." After that, the station became a project in survival engineering. I stopped thinking of reinforcements as security upgrades and started thinking of them as load paths, how force travels through materials, how to make a barrier transfer impact into the ground instead of flexing until it fails. I added internal bracing to the fence at the corners using steel pipe sections anchored into concrete-filled buckets. Ugly, but effective. I built a secondary barrier inside the fence line, around the building itself, using welded livestock panels stored for instrument protection. I anchored them with T-posts and wired them tight. It was a cage within a cage. I moved fuel drums farther from the fence, closer to the building, and covered them with a tarp that matched the gravel color to reduce shine. I built a small observation platform inside the building, just a reinforced step near the window slit, so I could watch without shifting insulation panels and exposing light. So, I organized supplies into labeled bins and made a strict ration plan, a set number of calories per day, a set water amount, a set fuel use limit. I treated it like a maintenance schedule. Because if you can measure something, you can manage it. And if you can manage it, you can keep panic from running the show. Weeks passed. The infected came twice more, smaller groups. Each time, the fence held long enough for me to lure them away with a controlled sound. Each time I repaired and reinforced. Each time I lost a little more peace. But the station stayed functional. And the radio became my only window into humanity. One night, a new voice came on. Thin, shaky, but clear. "This is Maribel," she said. "If anyone can hear, we're still moving. We found water. We found shelter. We're alive." My throat tightened. I hadn't expected to hear her again. Cal didn't cut in. He stayed quiet. Maribel continued, voice trembling. "To the man at the remote station, thank you. You kept us going. I won't say where we are, I just wanted you to know it mattered." Then the channel went quiet again. I sat in the equipment room, staring at the radio, feeling something inside me loosen and ache at the same time, It mattered. Invisibility kept me alive, but being remembered kept me human. That was the balance I had to find, and it never stopped shifting. By the time the nights began to get colder, the station's biggest threat wasn't the infected. It was time. Batteries degrade, diesel ages, food runs out, people make mistakes when they're tired. And isolation does something strange. It makes you start talking to objects like they're friends. I caught myself thanking the charge controller when the voltage stayed stable. I caught myself apologizing to the generator when I had to start it for an hour to equalize the batteries. I caught myself narrating my own actions out loud like I was recording a training video. Sucka, maybe that was why Cal stayed on the radio. Maybe that was why I did too. Because the worst risk of staying off the map isn't that something finds you. It's that nothing does. It's the possibility that you survive the outbreak and then die anyway, quietly, because nobody knew you were there and you didn't know how to come back. On the first morning, the temperature dropped below freezing. I made a decision. Not about leaving, about broadcasting. I went into the equipment room and pulled up the station's data transmission settings. Normally, the station sent environmental data packets every 15 minutes. Wind speed, temperature, humidity, particulate levels, seismic readings, compressed and transmitted via satellite. It was a steady stream of numbers. Numbers don't ask for help. Numbers don't reveal a person. I edited the transmission payload and added a small additional line, something the system would send as plain text embedded in the data header. Not coordinates, not a name, just a message. Remote site active, human occupied, do not approach, monitoring radio top of hour. Then I added another line, even smaller, like an afterthought. If you hear this, you are not alone. I stared at it for a long time before I saved it. The message would go out with the data. It would be received by anyone still collecting it. Universities, agencies, whoever still had servers running. It wasn't a beacon to the desperate on the road. It was a quiet whisper into the remaining infrastructure. A way of saying, I'm here. I don't know if anyone ever saw it. I don't know if those servers stayed alive another week. But when I sent it, I felt something settle inside me. I wasn't just hiding anymore. I was choosing what kind of person I would be in a world that didn't have rules. That night, at the top of the hour, Cal came on before anyone else. You send something? He asked. I froze. What do you mean? I picked up a data burst on a scanner, he said. Not voice, data. Your kind of data. My blood went cold. How? Cal chuckled without humor. Told you, I used to be on the rescue side. I know how to listen. You embedded text, didn't you? I didn't answer. You're playing with fire, he said, but his voice wasn't angry. It was almost resigned. You're going to get found. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'll get remembered. Silence. Then Cal said quietly, You think being remembered will save you? No, I said. Silence. Then Cal said quietly, You think being remembered will save you? No, I said, but it might save someone else. Cal breathed out slowly. You're still that guy, he said, like it was both insult and admiration. Fine, then do it smart. Don't let your message be an invitation. It's not, I said. It's a warning. And warnings don't stop hungry people, he replied. No, I agreed, they don't. The next morning, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in months. An engine. Not wind, not my generator. A real engine approaching. I went to the window slit and looked out. A pickup truck was on the access track, moving slow. Behind it, another vehicle, an old SUV. Both were dusty. Both looked heavy with cargo. They stopped well short of the fence. 4 people got out. They didn't rush the gate. They didn't wave wildly. They moved with caution and discipline, scanning the hills, checking each other, keeping distance. One of them carried a long gun held low, not pointed. They looked like people who had learned hard lessons and survived them. My mouth went dry. Had my message brought them? Or had Maribel's gratitude turned into a rumor that finally reached the wrong ears? I stood very still, listening to the faintest sounds through the walls. One of the people stepped forward and called out, voice steady. "Remote site? We're not here to take from you. We heard your transmission. We're part of a field team that stayed active. We have trade. Trade." The word hit me like a lifeline and a trap at the same time. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but I could see their posture, controlled, wary, tired. I heard Cal's voice in my head, "You're going to get found." I also heard Maribel's voice. It mattered. I didn't open the gate, but I didn't stay silent either. I stepped onto the porch inside the fence, hands visible, sidearms still holstered, and called back, loud enough to carry. "State your names and what you have," I said, "and back up 10 yards from the fence." They complied immediately. That alone told me something. People who intend harm don't like taking orders. The leader, tall, wearing a faded high-visibility vest over a jacket, raised his hands. "Name's Jonah Ellery," he said. "Used to work emergency communications for the state. This is my team. We have medical supplies, spare batteries, water filters, and diesel stabilizer. We're looking for functioning sites and survivors who can help rebuild the comms network. We can leave if you want." My heart pounded so hard it made me dizzy. Medical supplies, batteries, diesel stabilizer, those were gold out here. Comms network, rebuild. Those were words I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. "Why me?" I asked. Jonah looked up at the mast and solar array. "Because you're still running clean power and a high antenna," he said. "Because you're disciplined enough to stay invisible this long. And because you embedded a message that wasn't a cry for rescue. It was a signal." I swallowed. "Signals get people killed," I said, thinking of Cal. Jonah nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "So do silences." I didn't know what to do with that. I looked at the desert around them. No movement on the hills, no infected shambling in from the flats. Just wind and dust and a thin line of smoke on the horizon. I thought about my ration plan, my failing batteries, my aging fuel, my loneliness that had become a physical ache. I thought about being forgotten. Then I made a second decision, still not about leaving, about opening a door carefully. "Drop the medical supplies and batteries near the fence," I said. "Back away, then we'll talk more." They did it without argument. They placed a sealed plastic tote on the ground, stepped back, and waited. I moved to the fence gap, checked the ground, scanned the hills again, and then reached through with a hooked tool to drag the tote inside without exposing myself too much. Inside, I opened it quickly and checked. Bandages, antibiotics, water purification tablets, a compact filter pump, spare deep cycle battery units sealed, diesel fuel stabilizer, chemicals that help slow the breakdown of stored fuel, even a small roll of copper wire and connectors. My throat tightened. This wasn't a trap for supplies. This was an investment. I closed the tote, looked back at them, and called out, "What do you want?" Jonah answered, "Information," he said, "and cooperation. We're trying to link remaining sites into a relay, not to broadcast locations to the public, to coordinate between pockets, quietly, like you've been doing, but with structure." I stared at him. "How many pockets?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Enough to matter, not enough to relax." I believed him, not because I wanted to, but because his caution sounded real. Behind me, the station hummed softly, alive. I looked at the mast, the antennas, the solar panels catching thin winter light. A station that listens could become a station that speaks. That was dangerous. It was also the first thing that sounded like a future. I didn't open the gate, but I didn't send them away either. "Top of the hour," I said. "That's when I talk. Come back then, same distance, same rules. If you violate them, you leave." Jonah nodded once, like a contract. "Understood," he said. They retreated to their vehicles and parked farther out, staying visible but not close. I went inside, locked the door, and sat with my back against the wall, breathing hard. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't only fear. It was possibility. At the top of the hour, I keyed the radio. "This is remote site," I said, voice steady because it had to be. "I have a field team outside my fence. They claim they're building a relay network. If anyone is monitoring, advise if you've heard of Jonah Ellery." The channel hissed. Then Cal's voice came through, low and sharp. "Don't." I closed my eyes. "Cal," I said. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said. "Or worse, you're going to get other people killed because you want to believe in a network." "Do you know him?" I asked. A pause. Then, reluctantly, Cal said, "I heard the name early on. Emergency comms guy. Might be real, might be a lie. Doesn't matter, you can't trust anybody who can find you." "They found me because I spoke," I said. "And that's why you shouldn't have," Cal replied. I swallowed. "Cal," I said quietly, "how long have you been alone?" Silence. Long enough that I thought he'd gone. Then he said, voice barely above a whisper, "Long enough." I leaned my forehead against the cool metal edge of the rack. "Then you know what this is," I said. "It's not a rescue, it's not a miracle, it's a chance to not rot inside my own head." Cal exhaled, and the sound carried through the radio like wind across a canyon. "You're going to do it anyway," he said. "Yes," I admitted. "Then do it like you're wiring a bomb," he said. "Assume every mistake kills you. Keep your gate locked, keep your fallback, keep your supplies hidden. Don't let them inside your building, ever." "I hear you," I said. "And Mason," Cal added, voice rough. "If it goes bad, don't die nice." The channel went quiet. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the inverter fan, the faint click of relays, the quiet life of a place that wasn't meant to hold a person for months. Then I stood, checked my gear, and prepared for the next step, because survival wasn't just hiding anymore. It was choosing where to place trust, how to build layers, how to remain invisible while still connecting. A signal without a beacon, a voice without a map. Outside, Jonah and his team waited in the cold desert light, small shapes against a wide world that didn't care. Inside, I checked the whiteboard notes, my own record of days that might otherwise blur into nothing. I wrote a new line. Day 90-ish, first contact with organized team. Possible network, gate stays locked, rules stay strict, still alive. Then I looked at the last line I'd added weeks ago. If you hear this, you are not alone. For the first time since the outbreak started, it didn't feel like a lie. Not because everything was okay. Not because danger was gone. But because somewhere out there, someone else was listening, making plans, trying to keep a thin thread of structure alive in the ruins. And as long as that thread existed, There was a reason to keep the station running. There was a reason to keep myself running too. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.